The sharp metallic click of a revolver cylinder snapping into place echoed through the barn, followed by a woman's voice humming a melody so mournful it seemed to carry the weight of every lost soul who'd ever crossed the California plains. Benjamin Fletcher paused in the doorway of the weathered structure on the outskirts of Ventura, California, his hand still resting on the rough wood as he took in the unexpected scene before him. The afternoon light of 1878 filtered through gaps in the planked walls, casting dusty golden beams across a young woman seated on an overturned crate, surrounded by an arsenal that would make most gunslingers envious. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she cleaned a Colt revolver, her slender fingers stained with gun oil as she worked the cloth through every mechanism with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of years of familiarity. Benjamin had ridden into Ventura 2 days prior, looking for work and a place to rest after months of driving cattle up from Arizona territory. The town sat along the California coast, where the Pacific Ocean met rolling hills that stretched inland toward mountains, still capped with winter snow, despite the warming April weather. It was a town caught between the old ways and the new, where Spanish land grant families still held sway over vast ranchos, while American settlers pushed in with their own ambitions and dreams. He'd heard the Valdez family ranch needed experienced hands, and he'd come hoping to find steady work that didn't involve sleeping under stars or eating dust kicked up by 1,000 head of cattle. The woman continued humming, seemingly unaware of his presence. Her dark auburn hair was pulled back in a practical braid that fell past her shoulders, though several strands had escaped to frame a face that held both strength and something indefinably sad. She wore a simple cotton dress the color of faded cornflowers, covered by a leather apron that protected her from the oils and residue of her work. Around her on the dirt floor lay at least a dozen firearms in various states of disassembly, from rifles to pistols to a shotgun that had seen better days. "That's a sad song for such dangerous work," Benjamin said finally, his voice cutting through the quiet barn. The woman's hands stilled, but she didn't startle or reach for any of the loaded weapons that surely lay within reach. Instead, she finished the stroke of her cleaning cloth before looking up at him with eyes the color of storm clouds over the ocean, gray and deep and measuring. Her gaze traveled from his worn boots to his sun-darkened face, taking in the dust on his clothes and the honest wear of a working cowboy who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it. "Most dangerous work deserves a sad song," she replied, her voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of California Spanish mixed with something else, perhaps Irish or Scottish in her ancestry. "Who are you, and what are you doing in my father's barn?" "Benjamin Fletcher, madam. I spoke with a man named Miguel this morning about work. He told me to come back this afternoon and wait here while he fetched your father." Benjamin stepped fully into the barn now, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that had been ingrained in him since boyhood. "I apologize if I'm intruding." "Rosa Valdez," she said simply, setting down the Colt and picking up another pistol from her collection. "Miguel is my uncle. My father is likely going over the books in the house. He hates hiring decisions, so he probably sent Miguel to handle it and forgot to mention anything to me." There was affection in her voice despite the exasperation, the kind that came from knowing someone's habits too well to be truly annoyed by them. Benjamin moved closer, careful to keep his movements slow and unthreatening. Rosa Valdez couldn't have been more than 21 or 22, he guessed, making her several years younger than his own 26 years. But there was something in the way she held herself, in the competence of her hands with those weapons, that suggested she'd lived through experiences that aged a person beyond their years. "That's quite a collection," he observed, gesturing to the firearms spread around her. "You do this for all the ranch hands." "I do this because someone has to, and I'm the only one who does it right," Rosa said matter-of-factly. "My father's vaqueros are excellent horsemen and good with cattle, but they treat their weapons like afterthoughts. A gun that isn't properly maintained is worse than no gun at all. It gives you false confidence right up until the moment it misfires and gets you killed." She held up the pistol she'd just picked up, squinting down the barrel to check for fouling. "This one belonged to a man named Carlos. He was one of my father's best workers, but he never cleaned his rifle properly. When bandits came through last year trying to steal cattle, his weapon jammed on the second shot. The third man he tried to fire at shot him instead." The matter-of-fact way she delivered this information sent a chill through Benjamin. "I'm sorry for your loss. Don't be sorry, be smart." Rosa's eyes met his again, and he saw the steel beneath the sadness there. "If my father hires you, Mr. Fletcher, you'll bring me any weapons you carry every Sunday evening, and I'll make sure they're in working order. That's not a request." "Yes, madam," Benjamin said, and he meant it. He'd met plenty of women in his travels across the West, from dance hall girls to ranchers' wives to the occasional female outlaw, but he'd never met one quite like Rosa Valdez. There was something magnetic about her combination of feminine grace and absolute competence, with tools of violence. She returned to her humming as she worked, and Benjamin recognized the melody now. It was an old ballad about a woman who waited for her lover to return from war, only to learn he'd died in a battle far from home. The song had at least a dozen verses, each sadder than the last, chronicling the woman's descent into grief and her eventual death from a broken heart. It was the kind of song men sang around campfires when they'd had too much whiskey and were feeling maudlin about the lives they'd left behind. "Why that song?" Benjamin asked, settling himself on a hay bale across from her. If he was going to wait for her father, he might as well wait in interesting company. Rosa's hands paused again, and for a moment he thought she might not answer. Then she sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. "My mother used to sing it. She sang it the day my brother left to join the army, and she sang it the day we got word he'd been killed at Little Bighorn. She sang it every day after that until the fever took her 6 months later. I suppose it just stuck with me." The Battle of Little Bighorn had been 2 years ago now, in the summer of 1876. The news had spread across the West like wildfire, the shocking defeat of Custer and his men at the hands of Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. Benjamin had been in Texas when word reached them, and he remembered the mixture of disbelief and grim satisfaction among the various cowboys and drifters he'd known. Custer had been reckless, they'd said, arrogant in his certainty of victory. But that didn't make the deaths of over 200 soldiers any less tragic, any less permanent. "That's a heavy burden to carry," Benjamin said quietly, "losing them both like that. We all carry burdens, Mr. Fletcher. That's just part of living." Rosa set down the pistol she'd been working on and reached for another, this one a rifle with intricate silver inlay work along the barrel. "The question is whether we let those burdens crush us or whether we use them to make us stronger. My mother let hers crush her. I won't make the same mistake." Before Benjamin could respond, the barn door swung open more fully, and a man entered who could only be Rosa's father. He was perhaps 55, with hair gone mostly gray and a weathered face that spoke of decades working under the California sun. He wore the clothes of a prosperous rancher, well-made but practical, and he moved with the slightly bow-legged gait of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. "You must be Fletcher," the man said, his accent much stronger than his daughter's, the Spanish rolling thick through his words. "I am Rafael Valdez. Miguel tells me you have experience with cattle and horses both." Benjamin stood, offering his hand. "Yes, sir. I've worked ranches in Texas and Arizona Territory, and I've done 2 cattle drives up to railroad towns in Kansas. I can handle a rope, break horses if needed, and I'm decent with carpentry and general repairs." Raphael's handshake was firm, his eyes sharp as they assessed Benjamin. "We run cattle and some horses here, but it's different from Texas ranching. The land here is not as open. We have hills, canyons, brush thick enough to hide a cow until she's ready to calve and wants to stay hidden. The work is hard, the pay is fair, and I expect loyalty from the men who work for me." "That seems reasonable, sir. Miguel tells me you don't drink to excess, don't gamble, and don't start fights. Is that true?" "I'll have a beer or whiskey on occasion, sir, but I've never been one to lose myself in a bottle. I've seen what that does to men. As for gambling and fighting, I've got no interest in either. I've worked too hard for my money to throw it away on cards or dice, and I've seen enough violence in my life to know it's nothing to seek out." Benjamin met the older man's gaze steadily. Raphael nodded slowly, seeming satisfied with what he saw. "The work starts at dawn. You'll bunk with the other hands in the quarters behind the main house. Meals are provided, and you'll get Sunday afternoons off unless there's an emergency. Pay is $25 a month. If you prove yourself useful and stay on through the year, there'll be a bonus at Christmas." "I appreciate the opportunity, sir." "Good. Miguel will show you where to stable your horse and get you settled." Raphael turned to leave, then paused, glancing at his daughter. "Rosa, don't keep Mr. Fletcher here talking all afternoon. He has work to prepare for." "Yes, Papa," Rosa said, but there was amusement in her voice that suggested she'd do exactly as she pleased regardless of her father's gentle admonishment. After Raphael left, Benjamin found himself oddly reluctant to leave the barn. Rosa had returned to her work, but the sad melody had left her lips, replaced by a more neutral silence as she worked. The afternoon light had shifted, painting everything in deeper gold, and dust motes danced in the air between them. "I'll see you Sunday, then," Benjamin said finally, settling his hat back on his head. "For the weapon inspection." Rosa looked up, and something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I look forward to seeing if you take better care of your guns than poor Carlos did." "For your sake, I hope you do." Benjamin couldn't help but smile at that. "I'll make sure they're spotless, Miss Valdez. Just Rosa, please. We don't stand much on formality around here." She tilted her head slightly, studying him with those storm-gray eyes. "And I'll call you Benjamin, if that's acceptable." "More than acceptable," he said, and he meant it. The next several days passed in the kind of hard, honest work that Benjamin had always found satisfying. The Valdez Ranch was indeed different from the vast open ranges of Texas. Here, the cattle roamed through coastal hills covered in golden grass and dotted with dark green oaks. Canyons cut through the landscape like wrinkles in an old face, and the Pacific Ocean provided a constant backdrop, sometimes visible from the higher elevations. Its presence always felt in the moisture-laden air that rolled in each evening. The other ranch hands were mostly Mexican or Californio vaqueros, men who'd been working this land since before California had become an American state. They were skilled horsemen who used different techniques than the cowboys Benjamin had worked with in Texas. Their saddles and ropes, and even their approach to handling cattle shaped by Spanish traditions going back centuries. They were welcoming enough once they saw he could do the work, though there was always a slight distance, an acknowledgement that he was an outsider to their established community. Miguel, who served as the ranch foreman, was a patient teacher when Benjamin needed guidance on the local ways of doing things. He was Raphael's younger brother, perhaps 45, with the same weathered features but a quicker smile and an easier manner. Over the course of that first week, as they worked together repairing fences damaged by winter storms, Miguel shared bits and pieces of the ranch's history and the Valdez family story. The land had been part of a Spanish land grant going back to the late 1700s, Miguel explained. Rosa's grandfather had built the ranch into something prosperous, running cattle and horses across thousands of acres. When California became an American state in 1850, many of the old Spanish and Mexican families had lost their land to American settlers and legal challenges, but the Valdez family had been lucky. They'd had good lawyers and clear documentation, and they'd adapted to the new reality, learning English and American business practices while maintaining their traditions. Rosa's mother was Irish, Miguel said one afternoon as they stretched new wire. Bridget O'Connor, she was called. Her family came west in the gold rush of '49, lost everything looking for gold that wasn't there. She was working in a boarding house in Los Angeles when Raphael met her. He fell in love with her voice first, he always said. She sang like an angel, even when she was singing the saddest songs you ever heard. Rosa mentioned her mother passed, Benjamin said carefully, not wanting to pry but curious to understand the sadness he'd seen in Rosa's eyes that first day. 6 months after we got word about Ramon, her son. The boy was only 19, barely old enough to grow a proper mustache, but he had ideas about adventure and glory. He lied about his experience to get into the cavalry, told them he was an expert horseman who could track anything. Well, that part was true enough, I suppose. But it didn't matter in the end. He died with Custer, and Bridget died right along with him, even though it took her body half a year to catch up with her heart. Miguel's face was grave as he secured the wire. Rosa found her mother one morning, just lying peaceful in her bed like she'd decided to go to sleep and never wake up. The doctor said it was fever, and maybe there was some fever involved, but we all knew it was really a broken heart that killed her. Benjamin thought about that as he worked, about the weight of grief and how differently people carried it. He thought about Rosa's words in the barn, about choosing not to let burdens crush you, and he understood a little better now where that steel in her spine came from. Sunday came, bringing with it the leisure of an afternoon off after morning chores were completed. Benjamin spent extra time that morning carefully cleaning and oiling his weapons, a rifle and 2 pistols he'd carried for years. They were good guns, well maintained because his life had depended on them more than once during his travels. But he found himself giving them even more attention than usual, wanting them to pass Rosa's inspection, wanting her to see that he was the kind of man who took care of his tools. He found her in the same barn, though this time the afternoon was cloudy, the light filtering through the slats softer and grayer than it had been the week before. She was working on what looked like a very old Spanish pistol, the kind that had probably been brought to California back when it was still part of Mexico. Her hair was loose today, falling in waves past her shoulders, and she wore a simple white blouse and dark skirt that made her look younger, softer than she had in her work clothes. "Benjamin," she said when he appeared in the doorway, and he liked the way his name sounded in her voice, liked the familiarity of it. "Let's see what you've brought me." He laid out his weapons on the wooden table she'd set up, and she examined each one with the same careful attention he'd seen her give every firearm that first day. Her fingers traced along barrels and checked mechanisms, her eyes sharp as she looked for any sign of neglect or poor maintenance. Benjamin found himself watching her face more than his guns, noting the way she bit her lower lip slightly when she concentrated, the way her brow furrowed when she found something that concerned her. "These are good," she said finally, and there was approval in her voice that made something warm bloom in Benjamin's chest. "Very good, actually. You take care of your weapons." "A man taught me when I was young that a gun is only as reliable as the hand that maintains it," Benjamin said. "I've never forgotten that lesson. A wise man." Rosa set down the last pistol and looked up at him. "Where did you learn? Your family—" Benjamin shook his head. "My father was a preacher, actually. He died when I was 10 and my mother followed a year later. I was raised by an uncle who ran a freight business in Missouri. One of his drivers, an old mountain man named Gideon, took it upon himself to teach me everything he knew about surviving in wild country. Guns, horses, tracking, reading weather. He said a boy needed practical skills more than book learning if he was going to make his way in the West." "And did you make your way?" Rosa's voice was curious, genuinely interested, and Benjamin found himself wanting to tell her things he rarely shared with anyone. "I've survived, if that's what you mean. I've seen a fair bit of the West, worked different jobs, met all kinds of people. But I can't say I've found a place that felt like home, not since I was a boy in Missouri." He paused, surprised at his own honesty. "Maybe I'm still looking." "Maybe you'll find it here," Rosa said softly, and when their eyes met, something passed between them, some acknowledgement of a connection neither of them had quite expected. They talked for over an hour that afternoon, the conversation flowing easily from one topic to another. Rosa told him about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before she could properly walk, about her mother's songs and her father's stories of old California. She spoke about her brother too, about Ramon's restless energy and his need to prove himself in a world beyond the ranch boundaries. "He couldn't understand why I was content here," Rosa said, her fingers unconsciously working oil into a cloth as she spoke. "He thought I should want to see cities, to have adventures, to be more than just a rancher's daughter. But he didn't understand that I found my adventures right here. Every day brought something new, some problem to solve or skill to master. And I loved this land, these hills and canyons. They're in my blood the way they were in my mother's heart after she married into this family." Benjamin told her about his own wanderings, about drives through dust storms and floods, about nights under stars so thick they looked like spilled salt. He told her about the men he'd worked with, the good and the bad, and the lessons he'd learned about human nature in bunkhouses and around campfires. He didn't tell her about the violence he'd witnessed or occasionally participated in, the claim jumpers he'd helped run off in Arizona, or the rustlers he'd tracked with a sheriff's posse in New Mexico. Those were stories for another time, if ever. When the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink visible through the barn's open door, Benjamin realized he'd spent the entire afternoon in Rosa's company, and it had felt like mere minutes. He also realized that something had changed between them. Some barrier had been crossed. They were no longer strangers, no longer just employer's daughter and hired hand. They were two people who'd found an unexpected connection, a meeting of minds and something else, something Benjamin didn't quite have words for yet. As spring turned toward summer, that connection only deepened. Benjamin found himself looking forward to Sunday afternoons, with an anticipation that had nothing to do with rest and everything to do with seeing Rosa. Their weapons maintenance sessions became the anchor of his week, the point around which everything else revolved. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and opinions and dreams. Rosa was whip-smart, Benjamin discovered, with a quick wit and a depth of knowledge that surprised him. She'd been educated by a tutor her mother had insisted on, learning literature and mathematics and history alongside the practical skills of ranch life. The other ranch hands noticed, of course. Miguel watched with knowing eyes but said nothing, at least not to Benjamin. The vaqueros teased him gently in Spanish, words he only half understood but whose meaning was clear enough in their tone and laughter. Benjamin bore it all with as much grace as he could muster, refusing to confirm or deny whatever they thought they saw developing between him and Rosa. But it was developing. That much was undeniable. Benjamin found himself thinking about Rosa at odd moments, her laugh echoing in his mind as he worked, her serious expression when she examined a firearm appearing before his eyes as he lay in his bunk at night. He found excuses to be near the barn on days other than Sunday, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, to exchange a few words in passing. And Rosa, for her part, seemed to find reasons to be wherever he was working, bringing water to hands in the field or checking on cattle in pastures where Benjamin happened to be riding fence lines. It was Miguel who finally said something, pulling Benjamin aside one evening in late June as the sun set in a blaze of crimson glory over the Pacific. They'd been working to move a small herd to higher pasture, and the day's work was done. "My niece is a good woman," Miguel said without preamble. "She deserves a good man." Benjamin met the older man's eyes, seeing the protective concern there and respecting it. "I know that. Her father sees what is happening between you two. He likes you, Benjamin, respects your work, but you need to understand what you would be taking on. Rosa is not some dance hall girl you can court and leave. She is Raphael's daughter, the last of his children. If you pursue this, you need to be serious about it. You need to be thinking about a future, not just a passing fancy." "I am serious," Benjamin said, and as the words left his mouth, he realized how completely true they were. Somewhere in the past months, without quite meaning to, he'd fallen in love with Rosa Valdez. He loved her competence and her strength, her sadness and her steel. He loved the way she hummed old songs and the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something that mattered to her. He loved her in a way he'd never loved anyone before, with a depth and certainty that both thrilled and terrified him. "Then you should speak to Raphael," Miguel said simply. "It is the proper way." Benjamin spent a sleepless night considering Miguel's advice. He'd never imagined himself as a marrying man, had always thought he'd spend his life drifting from job to job, place to place, never putting down roots. But Rosa had changed that calculus. The thought of leaving Ventura, of riding away from this ranch and never seeing her again, was physically painful. He wanted to stay, wanted to build a life here, wanted to see if the something blooming between them could grow into something permanent and real. The next evening he knocked on the door of the main ranch house, his heart pounding in a way it never had when facing down angry cattle or difficult horses. Raphael answered, his eyebrows rising slightly in surprise. "Benjamin, is something wrong?" "No, sir. I was hoping I could speak with you." "About a personal matter." Understanding dawned in Raphael's dark eyes, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his weathered face. "Come in. Let us talk in my office." The interior of the house was cool and beautiful, with thick adobe walls and high ceilings, dark wood furniture and woven rugs. Raphael led him to a room lined with books and papers, clearly the heart of the ranch's business operations. He gestured Benjamin to a chair and poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking, handing one to Benjamin before settling into his own seat behind a massive wooden desk. "You want to court my daughter," Raphael said, not making it a question. "Yes, sir, if you and she are willing." Benjamin took a breath. "I know I'm not who you might have chosen for her. I have no land of my own, no wealth to speak of beyond what I've saved from my wages. But I'm a hard worker, I'm honest, and I care for Rosa more than I know how to properly express." Raphael sipped his whiskey, his eyes never leaving Benjamin's face. "Miguel says you are a good man. Rosa has not said anything to me directly, but a father knows when his daughter's heart is engaged, and I have seen the way you look at her, the way she looks at you." He paused, and shadows crossed his face. "I lost my son to his pride and his need for adventure. I lost my wife to grief. Rosa is all I have left, Benjamin. I will not lose her to a man who would hurt her or abandon her." "I would never," Benjamin said firmly. "Sir, I've spent years wandering, looking for something I couldn't name. I found it here. I found it in your daughter. If she'll have me, I want to spend my life making her happy, building something lasting. I want to earn a place here, not just as a hired hand, but as part of this family." Raphael was quiet for a long moment, studying Benjamin with an intensity that made him feel like every choice he'd ever made was being weighed and measured. Then the older man nodded slowly. "You have my permission to court Rosa properly. But know this, Benjamin Fletcher. If you break her heart, if you prove yourself unworthy of the gift she would be giving you, I will make you regret it. Do we understand each other?" "Perfectly, sir. Thank you." They shook hands, and Benjamin left the house feeling like he'd just won a battle more important than any gunfight, more significant than any challenge he'd ever faced. He had Raphael's blessing. Now he just needed to speak to Rosa herself, to find the words to tell her what she'd come to mean to him. He found her the next Sunday, as had become their custom, but this time he'd brought something with him. It was a small thing, just a book of poetry he'd purchased in town that week, using some of his carefully hoarded savings. The proprietor of Ventura's General Store had looked at him strangely when he'd asked for something with romantic verses, but had produced this slim volume bound in dark blue cloth. Rosa was waiting in the barn, but she had no guns spread before her today. Instead, she stood by the open door, looking out toward the ocean visible in the distance, her hair loose and shining in the afternoon light. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and the smile that lit her face made Benjamin's heart skip. "I was hoping you'd come," she said softly. "I'll always come," Benjamin replied, and he meant it as a promise. "Rosa, I need to talk to you, about us." She nodded as if she'd been expecting this and gestured for him to walk with her. They left the barn and headed up into the hills behind it, following a path Rosa clearly knew well. Neither spoke as they climbed, the sounds of the ranch fading behind them until there was only the whisper of wind through golden grass and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. They reached a spot where an ancient oak spread its branches wide, providing shade over a flat outcropping of rock that offered a view clear to the ocean. Rosa sat down on the stone, and Benjamin joined her, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been even when speaking to her father. "I spoke with your father yesterday," he began. "I asked his permission to court you properly." "I know," Rosa said, a slight smile playing at her lips. "He told me this morning. He said he thought you were an honorable man, and that if my heart was inclined toward you, he wouldn't stand in the way." "And is it? Your heart, I mean. Is it inclined toward me?" Benjamin asked, needing to hear her say it, needing to know he hadn't imagined the connection between them. Rosa turned to face him fully, her gray eyes serious. "Benjamin Fletcher, I started falling in love with you the first day you walked into that barn. You didn't treat me like some fragile flower or some curiosity because I was cleaning guns. You just talked to me like I was a person worth talking to, and every Sunday since, every conversation we've had, has only made me love you more." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm and strong against his. "So yes, my heart is very much inclined toward you." Relief and joy flooded through Benjamin in equal measure. "I love you too, Rosa. I didn't expect to, didn't plan on it, but you got into my heart somehow, and I don't ever want you to leave." He pulled out the book of poetry then, suddenly shy about the gesture. "I brought you this. I know it's not much, but I thought maybe you'd like it. Some of the verses reminded me of you." Rosa took the book carefully, her fingers tracing over the cloth cover with something like wonder. She opened it to a random page and read aloud, her voice giving music to the words. It was a poem about finding home in another person, about love that anchored a wandering soul. When she finished, there were tears shining in her eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Thank you." Benjamin reached up and gently wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. The gesture seemed to break some final barrier between them, and Rosa leaned forward, closing the distance until their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and full of promise. It was Benjamin's first kiss with her, and it felt like the first kiss of his entire life, like nothing before had ever mattered or counted. When they finally drew apart, both slightly breathless, Rosa laughed, the sound joyous and free. "I suppose we're courting now, then." "I suppose we are," Benjamin agreed, grinning like a fool and not caring in the slightest. The summer that followed was the happiest of Benjamin's life. He and Rosa courted properly under her father's watchful eye, spending Sunday afternoons together, sometimes in the barn with the guns, sometimes walking the ranch land, sometimes simply sitting and talking about everything and nothing. But there were also stolen moments, brief touches of hands when they passed each other during the workday, exchanged glances across the dinner table on the occasions when Benjamin was invited to eat with the family rather than with the other hands. The ranch kept everyone busy during those long summer months. Cattle needed to be moved to different pastures, fences needed constant repair, and new horses needed breaking to saddle. Benjamin threw himself into the work with renewed energy, determined to prove himself not just as a hired hand, but as a man worthy of Rosa and of a permanent place in this family. In August, a problem arose that tested everyone on the ranch. A group of bandits had been operating in the coastal hills, rustling cattle from various ranches and occasionally robbing travelers on the road between Ventura and Santa Barbara. The local sheriff had been trying to track them down without success, and tensions were running high among all the ranchers in the region. One hot afternoon, Benjamin was riding the eastern boundary of the Valdez land with two other hands, checking on a herd of young cattle when they spotted something wrong. Several cows were missing, and the signs were clear to anyone who knew how to read them. Someone had driven off at least a dozen head, and recently, probably within the last few hours. "We need to follow them," Benjamin said, already turning his horse in the direction the trail led. "If we can catch them quickly, we might recover the cattle before they're sold or butchered." The other two men, vaqueros named Esteban and Paco, exchanged glances. "We should get Miguel and more men," Esteban said. "These bandits are dangerous. By the time we ride back to the ranch and gather more men, the trail will be hours colder. They'll have too much of a head start." Benjamin checked his rifle, making sure it was ready if needed. "I'm going after them. You two do what you think is best." After a moment's hesitation, both men nodded and followed. They tracked the stolen cattle for over an hour, following a trail that led deeper into the canyons that cut through the coastal hills. The terrain grew rougher, the brush thicker, and Benjamin began to feel the tension that always came when danger was near. He'd been in situations like this before, and his instincts told him they were getting close. They found the bandits in a small canyon, 4 men attempting to rebrand the stolen cattle. The rustlers spotted them at almost the same moment, and for a handful of seconds, everyone froze, sizing each other up. Then one of the bandits went for his gun, and everything happened very fast. Benjamin had his rifle up and fired before the bandit could get a shot off, the bullet taking the man in the shoulder and spinning him around. The other bandits scattered, taking cover behind rocks and brush. Esteban and Paco dismounted quickly, using their horses as shields as they returned fire. The canyon erupted with the sound of gunshots, echoes bouncing off the rock walls until it was hard to tell how many weapons were actually firing. Benjamin took cover behind a boulder and tried to assess the situation. He could see two bandits clearly and suspected the other two were somewhere in the thick brush to his left. One of the visible bandits was firing steadily at Paco's position, keeping the vaquero pinned down. Benjamin took careful aim and fired, this time hitting the bandit in the leg. The man went down screaming, and his companion grabbed him and began dragging him toward their horses. "They are running!" Esteban shouted, and indeed, the bandits seemed to have decided discretion was the better part of valor. They were mounting up, the wounded men being hauled onto horses by their companions. Benjamin could have shot them as they fled, could have ended the threat permanently, but he held his fire. They were running, the cattle were recovered, and that was enough. The ride back to the ranch was tense, all three men scanning the surrounding hills for any sign of ambush or pursuit. But the bandits were truly gone, and by the time they drove the recovered cattle back toward the main herd, the sun was beginning to set. Raphael was waiting when they returned, having heard from other hands that something was happening. His face was grim as he listened to Benjamin's account of the confrontation, and when the story was finished, the older man shook his head. "You took a foolish risk, Benjamin. You could have been killed and Esteban and Paco with you." "Yes, sir, we could have. But we weren't, and we got the cattle back. Those animals represent money and work. I couldn't just let them be stolen." Benjamin met Raphael's eyes steadily. "I know it was a risk, but sometimes risks are necessary." Raphael was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You are brave, I will give you that, and loyal to this ranch, but do not take such risks lightly. Your life has value beyond the price of a few head of cattle. Remember that." That evening, Rosa found Benjamin in the barn where he was checking over his rifle after the day's excitement. She didn't say anything at first, just wrapped her arms around him from behind, her cheek pressed against his back. He could feel her trembling slightly. "I heard what happened," she said quietly. "I heard you could have been killed." Benjamin turned in her embrace, gathering her close against his chest. "But I wasn't. I'm right here, Rosa, safe and whole. Promise me you won't do something like that again. Promise me you won't take risks that could take you away from me." Her voice was fierce, desperate in a way he'd never heard before. Benjamin thought about his promise to her father, about the value of his life now that he had someone to live for. "I promise I'll be as careful as I can be." "But Rosa, I can't promise to never face danger. This is the West, and there will always be risks. What I can promise is that I'll always fight to come back to you, always do everything in my power to make sure I'm here for you." She pulled back enough to look up at him, tears streaming down her face. "That's not enough. That's what Ramon probably thought, that he'd do everything in his power to come home. It didn't matter in the end. Rosa." Benjamin cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I am not Ramon. I don't seek out danger or glory. But I also can't live in fear, and I won't let fear rule you either. We can't control everything. All we can do is live our lives as fully as we can, love each other as deeply as we can, and trust that we're strong enough to face whatever comes." She closed her eyes, fresh tears escaping, but she nodded. I know you're right. But Benjamin, I can't lose you too. I can't survive losing another person I love." "You won't have to," he promised. even though he knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. "We're going to have a long life together, Rosa Valdez. I'm going to marry you, and we're going to raise children, and we're going to grow old watching sunsets from that spot under the oak tree. That's the future I see, the only future I want." They held each other in the quiet barn as darkness fell outside, and gradually Rosa's trembling stopped, her breathing evened out. She pulled back finally, using the heel of her hand to wipe at her face. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have fallen apart like that." "Don't apologize for caring, for being scared. That's part of love too, the fear of loss. It means what we have matters." Benjamin kissed her forehead gently. "And it does matter, Rosa. It matters more than anything." The incident with the bandits had consequences that rippled through the following weeks. The sheriff's posse finally tracked the rustlers down, using information from Benjamin's encounter to narrow their search. 2 of the bandits were killed in the confrontation, and the other 2 were captured and brought to trial in Ventura. Benjamin had to testify at that trial, standing before a judge and recounting what had happened in the canyon. It was his first time in a courtroom, and he found the formality of it strange, so different from the rough justice he'd seen meted out in other parts of the West. The bandits were found guilty and sentenced to prison terms in San Quentin, and that seemed to be the end of it. But the whole experience had shaken something loose in Benjamin, made him think more seriously about the future. He'd been at the Valdez Ranch for nearly 6 months now, and he'd never been happier or felt more at home anywhere in his life. It was time to take the next step, time to make his intentions toward Rosa completely clear. In late September, as fall began to touch the California coast with cooler temperatures and the first hints of rain, Benjamin rode into Ventura and visited the jeweler's shop he'd passed a dozen times without entering. The proprietor was an older man with spectacles perched on his nose, and he looked up with interest as Benjamin entered. "I need a ring," Benjamin said simply. "An engagement ring." The jeweler smiled, the expression knowing and warm. "For a special lady, I assume." "Do you have something particular in mind?" Benjamin thought about Rosa, about her strength and her sadness, about the way she hummed old songs and the competence of her hands with dangerous tools. Something simple but beautiful, strong, not too delicate because she works with her hands. They looked at several options, and Benjamin finally settled on a ring with a small diamond set in a band of white gold, simple and elegant without being flashy. It cost him nearly everything he'd saved from his months of wages, but he didn't hesitate. Rosa was worth every penny and more. He carried the ring in his pocket for nearly a week, waiting for the right moment. It came on a Sunday afternoon in early October, when he and Rosa had ridden out to their spot under the oak tree. The day was perfect, warm but not hot, with a breeze carrying the scent of the ocean and the last wildflowers of the season. Rosa had brought a basket of food, and they'd shared a meal while talking about small things, comfortable in each other's presence. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, Benjamin took Rosa's hand and pulled her to her feet. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it. "Rosa Valdez, I came to California looking for work, maybe a place to rest for a while before moving on to the next job. I never expected to find a home. I never expected to find you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small box containing the ring. "I know I'm not rich. I don't have land or wealth to offer you, but I have my hands, my strength, my loyalty, and my heart, and all of those belong to you if you'll have them." He opened the box, revealing the ring. "Will you marry me, Rosa? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you, building a future with you right here on this land you love?" Rosa's eyes were wide, filled with tears that caught the sunset light like prisms. Yes, she breathed, the word barely audible. Then louder, more certain. Yes, Benjamin Fletcher. Yes, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, and then she was in his arms, kissing him with a passion and joy that took his breath away. They stood there under the ancient oak as the sun set, holding each other and laughing and occasionally kissing again, both of them giddy with happiness and the promise of a future they would share. When they finally returned to the ranch house to tell her father, Raphael took one look at their faces and laughed, the sound booming and genuine. I suppose I should start planning a wedding then. If that's acceptable, sir, Benjamin said, suddenly formal in his nervousness. More than acceptable. Welcome to the family, Benjamin, officially this time. Raphael pulled him into an embrace, the gesture warm and fatherly. You have made my daughter happy. That makes you precious to me. The wedding was planned for December, after the fall work was done, but before the winter rains made travel difficult. Rosa threw herself into preparations with the same focused intensity she brought to everything, planning a ceremony that would honor both her father's Californio traditions and her mother's Irish heritage. The ranch became a hive of activity, as invitations were sent to neighbors and friends from as far away as Los Angeles and Santa Barbara. Benjamin felt somewhat overwhelmed by it all, but also deeply moved. He'd never imagined having a wedding like this, with family and community gathered to witness and celebrate. He'd always thought if he ever married, it would be a quick ceremony in front of a justice of the peace somewhere, something practical and unremarkable. This was different. This was Rosa bringing him fully into her world, giving him not just her hand but her family, her heritage, her place in this community. In November, 3 weeks before the wedding, Benjamin received an unexpected visitor. He was working on repairing a section of the barn when Miguel came to find him, his expression odd. Benjamin, there is a man here asking for you. Says his name is Gideon Pike, that he taught you when you were a boy. Benjamin dropped his hammer in shock. Gideon Pike. He hadn't seen his old mentor in over 10 years, not since he'd left Missouri at 16 to seek his fortune. Gideon is here, are you certain? That is the name he gave. He is at the house, speaking with Raphael. Benjamin hurried to the main house, his mind racing. How had Gideon found him? Why had he come? He found the old mountain man sitting in Raphael's parlor, looking completely out of place amid the fine furniture and decorations. Gideon had to be in his 70s now, his face a mass of wrinkles and his hair and beard pure white, but his eyes were still sharp and bright. Benjamin Fletcher, Gideon said, his voice still strong despite his age. You're a hard man to track down, boy. I've been following your trail for near 3 months now. Gideon. Benjamin grasped the old man's hand, overcome with emotion. I can't believe you're here. How did you find me? Asked questions, followed rumors. Spent a lot of time in saddles and on roads. Word gets around about a good cowboy and your name kept coming up here and there. Gideon studied him carefully. You've grown into a fine man, Benjamin. I'm proud of you. They talked for hours, Gideon sharing news from Missouri and his own wanderings over the years since they'd last seen each other. He'd retired from freighting, he explained, but found retirement boring and had decided to spend his remaining years traveling, visiting old friends and seeing parts of the country he'd never managed to reach during his working life. I heard in Ventura that you were working here and that you were fixing to get married, Gideon said. Thought I'd come see if it was true and if you might want an old friend at your wedding. Benjamin felt his throat tighten with emotion. I'd be honored, Gideon. More than honored. You're the closest thing to family I have besides Rosa and her father. Then I'll stay, if your boss doesn't mind putting up an old man for a few weeks. Gideon glanced at Raphael, who'd been listening quietly to their conversation. "You are welcome here as Benjamin's guest," Raphael said graciously. "Any man who helped raise someone I consider a son is welcome in my home." Having Gideon there in those final weeks before the wedding felt like a blessing Benjamin hadn't known he needed. The old mountain man fit in surprisingly well on the ranch, swapping stories with the vaqueros despite the language barrier, offering advice on horse training, and generally making himself useful. He also spent time with Rosa, who was initially shy around him but gradually warmed to his gruff kindness. "You picked a good one," Gideon told Benjamin one evening as they sat watching the sunset. "She's strong, that girl. Got steel in her spine but softness in her heart. That's a rare combination." "You treat her right, you hear me?" "I intend to," Benjamin promised. "I plan to spend every day of my life making sure she never regrets choosing me." "Good. That's what marriage should be about, both people waking up each day and choosing each other all over again." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "I never married myself. Came close once, long time ago, but she died of cholera before we could make it official. I never found another woman who measured up to her memory. Don't you make my mistake, Benjamin. Don't waste time or take your days for granted. Love her hard and clear while you have the chance." The wedding took place on a clear December day, the sky a brilliant blue over the Pacific Ocean. A priest came from the mission in Ventura to perform the ceremony, and what felt like half the county turned out to witness it. The ceremony took place outdoors under the oak tree, where Benjamin had proposed, with chairs set up for the guests and decorations of evergreen boughs and late-season wildflowers. Rosa was breathtaking in her wedding dress, a gown of ivory silk that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit Rosa's slimmer frame. Her hair was dressed with flowers, and she wore her mother's pearl earrings. As she walked toward Benjamin on her father's arm, he felt his breath catch in his throat. This beautiful, strong, complicated woman had chosen him, had agreed to spend her life with him, and the magnitude of that gift threatened to overwhelm him. The ceremony was conducted in both English and Spanish, honoring both sides of Rosa's heritage. Benjamin spoke his vows clearly, promising to love and honor and cherish Rosa for as long as they both lived. Rosa's voice was strong as she made the same promises, her gray eyes locked on his. When the priest finally pronounced them husband and wife, and Benjamin kissed his bride, a cheer went up from the assembled guests that could probably be heard all the way to the ocean. The celebration that followed lasted long into the night. There was food and music, dancing and drinking, toasts given in multiple languages. Benjamin danced with Rosa until his feet ached, both of them grinning like fools, drunk on happiness more than wine. He danced with other women too, including several of the neighbor wives who wanted to welcome him properly to the community now that he was married into one of its founding families. And he watched Rosa dance with her father, the two of them moving through a traditional Spanish dance while others clapped the rhythm. Raphael's face showing both joy and a touch of melancholy as he gave his daughter into another man's care. Late in the evening, Gideon found Benjamin and pulled him aside. "I'm going to leave in the morning, head down to Los Angeles and maybe south from there. I've stayed longer than I intended, and I want to see more country before the year is out." "You don't have to go so soon," Benjamin protested. "You're welcome to stay as long as you like. I know, boy, and I appreciate it, but you have a new wife and a new life to start, and you don't need an old man cluttering up your house." Gideon gripped Benjamin's shoulder firmly. "You've done well for yourself, Benjamin Fletcher. Better than I ever imagined when I was teaching a scared orphan boy how to shoot straight and read trail signs. You found yourself a home and a family. That's more than most men ever get." "I couldn't have done it without what you taught me," Benjamin said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Gideon, for everything. Just be happy, boy, that's all the thanks I need." The old man pulled him into a brief, fierce hug. "And if you ever have a son, teach him the things I taught you. Pass it on." They said their farewells that night, because Benjamin knew from experience that Gideon would slip away early in the morning without further goodbyes. That was his way. The mountain man's habit of leaving before dawn and farewells became maudlin. But Benjamin felt the old man's blessing like a tangible thing, a final gift from the person who'd set him on the path that led to this moment. Raphael had given Benjamin and Rosa a house as a wedding gift, a small adobe structure that had been used for storage, now cleaned and renovated. It sat on a hill overlooking the main ranch buildings, with views clear to the ocean. It wasn't large, just 3 rooms, but it was theirs, a place to build their life together. That first night as husband and wife, Benjamin carried Rosa over the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture. They'd lit candles and lanterns throughout the small house, and the warm light made everything feel magical, outside the normal flow of time. They came together with a mix of passion and tenderness, learning each other in new ways, and afterward lay tangled together in their bed, talking quietly about their hopes and dreams for the future. "I want children," Rosa said, her head pillowed on Benjamin's chest, his arm wrapped around her. "At least 3, maybe 4 if we're blessed. I want sons and daughters, a family to fill this house and this ranch." "I want that too," Benjamin said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I want to see you round with our child, want to teach our sons and daughters how to ride and rope and everything else they'll need to know. I want to build something that lasts, Rosa, not just for us, but for the generations that come after. We'll do it together," Rosa promised. Everything together. The first year of their marriage was everything Benjamin could have hoped for and more. He settled fully into life on the ranch, no longer a hired hand but family, with responsibilities and authority that reflected his new position. Raphael began teaching him the business side of running the ranch, showing him the account books and explaining the relationships with buyers and other ranchers. It became clear that Raphael saw Benjamin as his heir, the person who would eventually take over when age made it impossible for Raphael to continue running things himself. Rosa bloomed in marriage, the sadness that had clung to her when Benjamin first arrived gradually fading as happiness took root. She still cleaned the ranch's weapons every Sunday, but now Benjamin helped her, the two of them working side by side while they talked about their week and made plans for the future. She still hummed old songs sometimes, but they were no longer always sad. Irish jigs and Spanish love songs joined the mournful ballads, reflecting the fuller range of emotions in her life. In the summer of 1879, Rosa discovered she was pregnant. She told Benjamin one evening as they sat watching the sunset from their porch, his hand held tightly in hers. "We're going to have a baby," she said simply, her voice full of wonder. "I'm certain of it." Benjamin felt joy and terror in equal measure flood through him. A child. He was going to be a father. The weight of that responsibility was immense, but so was the gift of it. "Are you happy?" he asked, searching her face in the dying light. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Rosa said, and she was crying, but they were clearly tears of joy. "I'm going to be a mother, Benjamin. We're going to be parents." They told Raphael that same evening, and the older man actually wept when he heard the news, embracing both of them fiercely. "A grandchild," he kept repeating. "I thought I would never live to see this day after losing Ramon and Bridget, but here you are, giving me this gift. This hope for the future." The pregnancy was not easy for Rosa. She suffered from sickness in the early months that left her exhausted and unable to keep food down. Benjamin hovered anxiously, trying to help however he could, bringing her water and crackers, holding her hair back when she was ill, sitting with her during the long nights when she couldn't sleep. He felt helpless in the face of her discomfort, wishing there was more he could do. But as the months passed, and her body changed to accommodate their growing child, Rosa's health improved. She regained her energy and her appetite, and she seemed to glow from within. Benjamin found her even more beautiful pregnant than she had been before, something he told her often enough that she laughed and accused him of having gone soft in the head. In late February of 1880, on a cold night when rain pounded against the roof of their little house, Rosa went into labor. Benjamin fetched the midwife from town, a capable older woman named Mrs. Chen who had delivered half the babies in Ventura, and then found himself relegated to pacing anxiously in the main room while Rosa labored in their bedroom. The hours crawled past like days. Benjamin could hear Rosa's cries of pain through the door, could hear the midwife's calm voice giving instructions and encouragement. Raphael arrived at some point, having been fetched by Miguel, and the two men waited together, united in their worry and hope. Finally, as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, a new sound joined the storm's fury, the sharp cry of a newborn baby. Benjamin was on his feet instantly, his heart pounding. Mrs. Chen emerged a few minutes later, smiling broadly. "You have a son, Mr. Fletcher, a strong, healthy boy. And your wife did beautifully. You may go see them now." Benjamin entered the bedroom to find Rosa propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up as he approached, her smile tired but full of love. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Benjamin approached carefully, almost afraid to touch the baby. He looked so fragile and small. But when Rosa placed the infant in his arms, something shifted in Benjamin's chest, some final piece clicking into place. This was his son, his and Rosa's, a perfect combination of both of them. The baby had Rosa's gray eyes and a shock of dark hair, and as Benjamin looked down at him, he felt a love so fierce it was almost painful. "He's perfect," Benjamin whispered. "What should we name him?" They discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but now, looking at this tiny person they'd created, Rosa said, "I want to name him Ramon after my brother, and Gideon for his middle name after the man who helped raise you, if that's acceptable to you." "Ramon Gideon Fletcher," Benjamin said, testing the name. "It's perfect. He's perfect." Raphael came in shortly after, and when he saw his grandson named for his lost son, the old man broke down completely, sobbing as he held the baby for the first time. It was healing. Benjamin realized this naming, this honoring of the dead while celebrating new life. It was a way of bringing Rosa's brother forward into the future, ensuring he would never be forgotten. The years that followed brought more children, building the family they dreamed of. A daughter, Elena Bridget, arrived 2 years after Ramon, named for Raphael's mother and Rosa's own. She had Benjamin's lighter coloring and her mother's fierce determination, showing from an early age that she would be a force to be reckoned with. Another son, Thomas Raphael, came 3 years after Elena, quieter than his siblings but thoughtful and kind. And finally, another daughter, Clara Rose, completed their family in 1887, a surprise baby born when Rosa was 30 and Benjamin 35. Her arrival celebrated with joy by the whole family. The ranch prospered under the joint leadership of Raphael and Benjamin. They weathered droughts and wet years, market downturns and disease outbreaks among the cattle. They modernized where it made sense, bringing in new breeding stock and experimenting with different grasses for pasture. but they also maintained the traditions that had sustained the ranch for generations. The knowledge of the land and the animals passed down through the Valdez family. As the children grew, Benjamin taught them everything Gideon had taught him, and Rosa taught them her own skills. Ramon proved to be a natural horseman and took to ranching like he'd been born to it. Alina was fascinated by the business side of things, and by the age of 12, was helping her grandfather with the account books. Thomas loved the land itself, spending hours exploring the canyons and hills, learning the names of plants and animals, understanding the rhythms of the seasons. And Clara, the baby, seemed to have inherited her mother's gift with weapons, showing an uncanny ability to hit targets that amazed everyone. Raphael lived to see all 4 of his grandchildren grow into young people he was proud of. He died peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1891, at the age of 68, and was buried in the family cemetery on the ranch next to his wife and son. His passing was mourned by the entire community, but it was not a tragic death. He had lived a full life, had seen his family continue into another generation, had died knowing the ranch he loved was in good hands. Benjamin took over full management of the ranch after Raphael's death, though by that time he'd been essentially running it for years already. He proved himself a capable and fair boss, respected by the vaqueros and other workers, known throughout the region as an honest man and a skilled rancher. But more than his professional success, Benjamin took pride in his family, in the life he and Rosa had built together. They grew older together, gracefully accepting the changes time brought. Rosa's auburn hair gained streaks of silver, and Benjamin's face became weathered and lined like his father-in-law's had been. But they still loved each other with the same intensity they had as young newlyweds, still took time to sit together under their oak tree and watch the sunset, still cleaned guns together on Sunday afternoons while they talked about everything and nothing. Their children grew up and began their own lives. Ramon married a local girl and took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, proving himself as capable as his father and grandfather before him. Alina moved to San Francisco, where she started a business helping ranchers sell their cattle to eastern markets, using her head for numbers and her gift for negotiation to build something successful. Thomas went to university to study agriculture and returned to the ranch with new ideas about land management and conservation. Clara, the youngest, shocked everyone by becoming a sharpshooter who performed in Wild West shows, traveling the country and sending letters home filled with stories of her adventures. Grandchildren began to arrive, Ramon and his wife producing 3 children in quick succession, while Alina eventually married a banker and had 2 daughters. Thomas married late, to a widow with a child of her own, and they added 2 more sons to the family. Even Clara eventually settled down, marrying a fellow performer and having twin boys who she swore inherited their father's charm and her aim. Benjamin and Rosa watched it all with satisfaction and joy, seeing the family they'd created spreading out into the world, making their marks, living lives full of purpose and love. They'd built something lasting, just as Benjamin had promised that first night as husband and wife. They'd created not just children but a legacy, a continuation of the Valdez Ranch and all it represented. In 1905, as Benjamin approached his 54th birthday and Rosa her 48th, they sat together on the porch of the house they'd lived in for over 25 years. Their grandchildren were running around the yard, playing some elaborate game that involved a great deal of shouting and laughter. Ramon and his wife were visiting for Sunday dinner, and the smell of cooking food drifted from the kitchen where several of the women were preparing the meal. "Did you ever imagine this?" Rosa asked, her hand clasped in Benjamin's, her head resting on his shoulder. "That day I found you in the barn, did you imagine all of this?" "I imagined something," Benjamin admitted, "but nothing this good, nothing this full." He pressed a kiss to her temple, breathing in the scent of her that was as familiar to him now as his own. "You gave me everything, Rosa. A home, a family, a purpose, a life worth living." "We gave it to each other," Rosa corrected gently. "I was so lost when you found me, Benjamin. Lost in grief and sadness, going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. You brought me back. You gave me reasons to sing happy songs instead of sad ones." "I still love when you hum those old ballads, though," Benjamin said with a smile. "Even the sad ones, they're part of you." "I know." Rosa squeezed his hand. "But I sing them differently now, not with grief but with memory. There's a difference." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their family, listening to the sounds of life and laughter that filled the ranch. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in the brilliant colors that never failed to move Benjamin even after all these years of watching California sunsets. "You remember what you said to me?" Rosa asked suddenly. "That first day when you found me cleaning guns." "I said you were humming a sad song for dangerous work," Benjamin recalled. "You did. And I told you that dangerous work deserved a sad song." Rosa lifted her head from his shoulder to look at him, her gray eyes still as beautiful as they'd been the day he'd first seen her. "But I was wrong, Benjamin. Dangerous work doesn't deserve a sad song. It deserves someone who loves you enough to make you want to come home safe. That's what you gave me. That's what we gave each other." Benjamin cupped her face in his hands, these hands that had worked so hard over the years, that had built fences and delivered calves and held his children and held his wife through laughter and tears. "I love you, Rosa Fletcher. I have loved you from the moment I saw you in that barn, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Rosa whispered. "My cowboy who wandered in from nowhere and became my everything." They kissed then, soft and sweet, and when they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. Around them, their family continued with their activities, unaware of the moment passing between the two people who had started it all. The sun continued its descent toward the ocean, the eternal rhythm of day ending and night beginning, the cycle continuing as it always had and always would. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges as years always do. The 20th century was a time of transformation, with automobiles beginning to appear on roads that had only known horses and wagons, with electricity slowly spreading from the cities into rural areas, with the old ways of the West giving way to modernity. But through it all, the Valdez Ranch endured, adapting where necessary but maintaining its essential character, the connection to land and tradition that had sustained it for over a century. Benjamin and Rosa aged gracefully together, their love deepening and mellowing like fine wine. They celebrated their silver wedding anniversary in 1903 with a party that brought together everyone they'd ever known. Friends and family and neighbors, all gathering to honor a marriage that had become legendary in the region for its strength and devotion. They renewed their vows that day, speaking the same words they'd spoken 25 years earlier, but with the weight of experience behind them, understanding now in ways they couldn't have as young people what those promises truly meant. In 1912, as they approached their 34th anniversary, Rosa became ill. It started as a cough that wouldn't go away, progressing to weakness and weight loss that alarmed Benjamin deeply. The doctors in Ventura could do little, and even specialists brought from Los Angeles offered no hope. It was pneumonia, they said, complicated by other factors, and at Rosa's age, there was little to be done beyond keeping her comfortable. Benjamin refused to accept this. He spent every moment at Rosa's bedside, holding her hand, talking to her, reading to her from the poetry book he'd given her all those years ago when they were courting. Their children came to visit, bringing grandchildren to see their beloved grandmother. Rosa rallied slightly during these visits, her eyes brightening at the sight of the family she'd helped create, but everyone could see she was fading. One evening in late October, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold outside their bedroom window, Rosa squeezed Benjamin's hand weakly. "I'm tired," she whispered. "So tired, my love." "I know," Benjamin said, his voice breaking despite his efforts to stay strong for her. "It's okay to rest, Rosa. I've got you. I'll always have you. Promise me something," Rosa said, each word clearly an effort. "Promise me you won't grieve too long. You have years left, Benjamin, good years. Live them fully, love our family, be happy. That's what I want for you." "I promise," Benjamin said, though the words felt like they were tearing him apart. "But Rosa, I don't know how to exist in a world without you in it." "The same way I would have if you'd been the one to go first," Rosa said, and incredibly she smiled. "One day at a time, one breath at a time, remembering the love but not drowning in the loss. We had a good life, Benjamin. Better than good. Extraordinary. Hold on to that. Let it carry you forward." She closed her eyes then, and for a moment Benjamin thought she was gone. But then she opened them again, looking past him toward the window where the last light of day was fading. "Benjamin," she said, her voice suddenly clearer, "do you remember our tree, the oak where you proposed?" "Of course I do. I want to be buried there, with a stone that faces the sunset. Will you do that for me?" "Yes," Benjamin promised. "Anything you want, my love." "And Benjamin, stop being so sad. I'm not gone yet." Rosa squeezed his hand with more strength than she'd shown in days. "I'm right here. Stay with me. Talk to me. Tell me about our life. Remind me of all the good things." So Benjamin did. He talked through the night, recounting their story from beginning to end. He told her about the first time he saw her cleaning guns in the barn, about how her humming had drawn him in. He reminded her of their courtship, of Sunday afternoons talking about everything and nothing, of the book of poetry and the proposal under the oak tree. He talked about their wedding, about Gideon's visit, about the joy of their wedding night and the years that followed. He spoke of their children, describing each birth in detail, recounting funny stories and proud moments. He talked about the ranch's history, about working alongside Raphael, about the changes they'd witnessed and the constants that endured. He reminded her of quiet mornings and spectacular sunsets, of laughter and tears, of the ordinary moments that had made up their extraordinary life together. Rosa listened with her eyes closed, occasionally smiling or squeezing his hand to let him know she heard him. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, painting their bedroom in soft gray light, her breathing changed, becoming slower, shallower. Benjamin held her close, continuing to talk, telling her over and over how much he loved her, how grateful he was for every moment they'd shared. Rosa Valdez Fletcher passed peacefully as the sun rose on October 23, 1912, surrounded by love, her hand clasped in her husband's, her children and several grandchildren gathered in the room. Her last words, spoken so quietly that only Benjamin heard them, were, "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for everything." The grief that followed was profound, shaking Benjamin to his core in ways he hadn't experienced since losing his parents as a child. But he'd made Rosa a promise, and he intended to keep it. He allowed himself time to mourn, to feel the full weight of his loss, but he didn't let it destroy him. Instead, he leaned into his family, drawing strength from the children and grandchildren Rosa had loved so much, finding purpose in helping them navigate their own grief. They buried Rosa under the oak tree as she'd requested, with a simple stone marker that bore her name, the dates of her birth and death, and a single line. She sang both sad songs and happy ones and made both beautiful. The entire community turned out for the funeral, testament to the respect and affection Rosa had earned over her lifetime. Benjamin continued running the ranch with Ramon's help, finding that the work provided structure and purpose to his days. He spent time with his grandchildren, teaching them the skills Rosa had wanted them to learn, telling them stories about their grandmother so they would never forget her. He made sure the tradition of cleaning weapons every Sunday continued, taking over the task himself, and he always hummed Rosa's favorite songs while he worked. The years passed, and Benjamin found that Rosa had been right. The grief didn't disappear, but it became bearable, a weight he carried rather than one that crushed him. He found joy again in small things, in sunsets and the laughter of great-grandchildren who began appearing as the years rolled on, in the satisfaction of a ranch well-run and a family well-loved. In 1923, at the age of 72, Benjamin finally decided it was time to step back from active management of the ranch. Ramon had been essentially running things for years anyway, and his own sons were taking on more responsibility. Benjamin wanted time to simply be, to rest, to enjoy the fruits of a lifetime of labor. He spent his final years peacefully, living in the little house on the hill that he and Rosa had shared for so long. His children and grandchildren visited frequently, and he became a beloved figure to the great-grandchildren, the old man with endless stories and gentle wisdom. He still made the walk to Rosa's grave under the oak tree every Sunday, cleaning the stone and sitting beside it while he talked to her, telling her about the family and the ranch, about the changes in the world and the constants that remained. On a summer evening in 1928, Benjamin Fletcher went to sleep in the bed he'd shared with Rosa for so many years and didn't wake up. He was 77 years old, had lived a long and remarkably full life, and he passed peacefully without pain or struggle. His family found him the next morning, lying peaceful with a slight smile on his weathered face, as if he'd seen something wonderful in his dreams. They buried him next to Rosa under the oak tree, their stones side by side facing the sunset. His marker bore his name and dates, and below them, words chosen by his children. He found his home and his heart in California, and he never looked back. The Valdez Ranch continued under the care of Ramon and his descendants, generation after generation taking their turn as stewards of the land. The story of Benjamin and Rosa became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren as an example of what love could build, what it could survive, what it meant to truly commit to another person and to a place. The oak tree where they'd courted and where they now rested became sacred to the family, a place to gather for important moments, a living connection to the past and the love story that had started everything. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right through the ancient branches, people swore they could hear the faint sound of someone humming an old ballad, sad and beautiful and full of memory. The ranch that had started as Rafael Valdez's family land became the Fletcher Valdez Ranch, acknowledging both sides of the family that had built it into what it was. Through economic depressions and world wars, through droughts and floods and all the challenges that time brought, it endured, a testament to the vision of the people who'd tended it and loved it across the generations. In the 21st century, the ranch was still operating, though much had changed from the days when Benjamin had first ridden in looking for work. The cattle were still there, still roaming the Golden Hills, but they were joined by wine grapes and sustainable agriculture projects, the land being used in new ways while respecting old traditions. The family had spread across California and beyond, pursuing various careers and callings, but there was always a Fletcher or a Valdez on the ranch, maintaining the connection, honoring the legacy. And under the ancient oak tree, now protected by a fence to keep grazing cattle away from its venerable trunk, two stones still stood side by side, marking the resting place of the cowboy who'd wandered in from nowhere and the woman who'd been humming sad songs while cleaning guns. Their love story, started on an ordinary afternoon in 1878, had rippled forward through time, creating waves that touched people they would never meet, shaping lives they could never have imagined. It was, the family agreed whenever they gathered and told the old stories, the best kind of love story. Not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but one of steadiness and commitment, of two people who'd found each other and built something lasting through decades of ordinary days and extraordinary love. It was a story that proved what truly mattered in life: connection, family, home, and the courage to commit to building something that would outlast your own lifetime. Benjamin had come to California looking for work, maybe a place to rest before moving on. Instead, he'd found Rosa, humming her sad songs in a barn filled with weapons, and in finding her, he'd found himself, his purpose, his future. She'd been cleaning instruments of death while singing about loss, but together they'd created life, joy, family, continuity. They'd taken their individual griefs and transformed them into something beautiful and enduring. And that, in the end, was the real story. Not about a cowboy and a woman with guns, though it had started there, but about two souls who'd recognized each other across the distance of their different pasts and chosen to walk forward together into an unknown future. About love that grew and deepened and lasted, that survived loss and created legacy, that proved itself in the quiet accumulation of ordinary days lived in partnership and devotion. Their story became Ventura County legend, one of those tales that captured something essential about the spirit of the place and the people who'd shaped it. And though the world changed beyond recognition from the one they'd known, though horses gave way to cars and telegrams to computers and open range to housing developments, the core truth of their story remained relevant and powerful. That love, real love, was the most lasting thing humans could create, more enduring than stone or steel, capable of reaching across time to touch hearts in generations yet unborn. Under the oak tree where it had all truly begun, where a nervous young cowboy had asked a strong young woman to share his life, the grass grew green each spring and golden each summer, eternal cycles continuing as they always had. And in the branches above those two simple stones, birds nested and sang, their songs mixing with the whisper of wind through ancient leaves, creating a music that somehow seemed to echo the melodies Rosa had once hummed, both sad and happy, mournful and joyful, capturing the full complexity of a life well lived and a love well honored. The ranch house where Benjamin and Rosa had raised their children stood on its hill overlooking the property, still occupied by family, still filled with the sounds of living. Pictures of the family patriarch and matriarch hung on the walls, their young faces looking out from old photographs, with the confidence of people who didn't yet know how remarkable their ordinary love would become. And in the barn, now updated with modern equipment, but still recognizable as the place where it all started, someone was always maintaining the ranch's collection of weapons, keeping alive the tradition Rosa had started all those years ago. The story of Benjamin and Rosa Fletcher ended with their deaths, but also didn't end at all. It continued in every child who bore their genes, in every person who heard their tale and was inspired to love more deeply or commit more fully. It continued in the ranch itself, in the land they'd tended and the traditions they'd honored. It continued in the simple fact that they had existed, had loved, had built something that mattered, and in doing so had touched eternity in the way all great love stories do. Benjamin Fletcher had found Rosa Valdez humming while cleaning guns on an April afternoon in 1878, and he'd commented that it was a sad song for dangerous work. Neither of them could have known that this simple exchange would be the beginning of a story that would echo through generations, that their love would become the foundation for something so much larger than themselves. But that's how the best stories always begin, with ordinary moments that contain the seeds of extraordinary futures, with two people meeting and recognizing something in each other worth fighting for, worth building toward, worth dedicating a lifetime to nurturing and protecting. And in the end, that's what they did. They fought for their love and their family. They built a legacy that outlasted them. They dedicated themselves to each other and to the land and to the future they were creating. They took sadness and turned it to joy, took loneliness and transformed it to connection, took the dangerous work of living and loving and made it into something beautiful, something worth singing about, whether the songs were sad or happy or some perfect combination of both. Their story, like all great love stories, was unique to them but also universal in its themes. It spoke to anyone who'd ever felt lost and found their way home in another person. It resonated with anyone who'd ever taken a risk on love and been rewarded beyond their wildest dreams. It reminded everyone who heard it that the most important things in life aren't grand gestures or dramatic moments, but the quiet choice to show up for the person you love, day after day, year after year, through good times and hard times, until death finally parts you and maybe not even then. Benjamin and Rosa Fletcher lived, loved, built a family and a legacy, and eventually passed from this world into memory and legend. But their love remained, enshrined in the stories told by their descendants, in the ranch that bore their stamp, in the simple truth that two people had once met, fallen in love and chosen to spend their lives together, and that choice had made all the difference. Not just for them, but for everyone who came after, everyone whose existence traced back to that moment when a cowboy commented on a sad song, and a woman with guns looked up and saw her future walking toward her. It was a good ending to a good life, the kind of ending everyone hopes for but few achieve. And under the oak tree on the California hill, where two stones stood side by side forever facing the sunset, the wind continued to blow and the grass continued to grow, and the cycle of seasons continued its eternal dance. The story was finished, but it was also never ending, living on in every generation that carried forward the blood and the legacy of the cowboy and his gun-cleaning bride. The two souls who'd found each other in 1878 and built something that would last as long as there were people to remember and tell their tale.